I'm Jeff Pospisil, the 10-Minute Treasurer with practical advice for improving your church's financial future. In this video, I'm going to look at what are the expectations for a church in documenting their expenses. So this is kind of internal controls. One of the things I'm also going to do is I'm going to include a couple of templates for an expense voucher, credit card log, a mileage log, those kinds of things that will also be good tools to help in this documentation process. The first one we're going to talk about is your regular reimbursements or bills. So this is the majority of your transactions. These are those reimbursements to staff and volunteers and just your regular invoices that come in. Most churches that I've worked with, they'll use some form of an expense voucher for reimbursements. And so I did create a template, and I'll include the link in the description. It's a half-page template in Word, so you can customize it all you want. And I'll just go ahead and walk through it. So here's my example expense voucher. You see I renamed it to the best UMC. So you have a place to enter who do you pay and where the check goes if you're mailing the check. And then there's this description and amount area. And you see I bought Mountain Dew and Reese's Pieces, and I didn't have to get this granular on it. One of the things I really recommend is that you ask them, so where is this coming out of, in the budget or a fund? And I put that it's coming out of the finance budget. Some churches, they'll ask you to put the account number, maybe. So if depending on their chart of accounts, but even if they're narrowing it down to what budget to take it out of or what fund, that'll help a lot for the accounting purposes. I've also included a couple of lines for comments and notes, and I just found that to be helpful through the years. So in this transaction, the business purpose behind Mountain Dew and Reese's Pieces is probably not self-evident. But if I write in here snacks for audit committee, okay, that is a valid business purpose. And again, I was probably too granular before. I probably could have just, instead of listing Reese's Pieces and Mountain Dew separately, I could have just put snacks for audit committee and that would have been fine. The other thing that I think is really important is the signature approval, that there's a place to sign it and date it. You should have a good idea about who has authority to spend from which budget section or which fund, because one of the things that is really demotivating and destroys trust is if you allow somebody to spend somebody else's budget. So for example, let's say I got a friend, Bob, and he decides he wants to charge something to the finance budget. Well, that's only okay if I authorize it. If Bob goes in and he has no authority over there and you still pay it out and it still hits my budget, all of a sudden you got an unhappy camper. The last thing I included on here, and again, you can change this up, is a reminder that you need receipts. So if I received this expense voucher and there was no receipt attached, I'd be very hesitant to actually reimburse. So if there is a receipt, it should be detailed enough to tell where it was purchased, what was purchased, and when it was purchased. Dana Bassett for the Dakotas Conference, she put on the back of our expense voucher a couple of example ones, which is helpful. So a credit card statement, or like this one here, this summary receipt, it won't cut it because you can't tell what was purchased. That's the big thing that you're missing from there. So if you can't tell what was purchased, then I would have a hard time reimbursing that. So what about bills and invoices that might cross your desk? I know of a number of churches that, just like reimbursements, they will fill out an expense voucher for every bill that crosses their desk. And I think that's a great practice. I'm a little bit on the cheap side. I like to save my half a sheet of paper. And so what I'll do is I'll just sign the bill like I did here. At the bottom there, you can see my signature. And I think that's fine. And if the business purpose isn't perfectly clear from the invoice, then I'll go ahead and just write right on the bill. Either way, I'm still trying to document, what was purchased, when was it purchased, and who did I purchase it from, and is it properly approved? Either way, the standard still stands. Now let's go ahead and look at what the documentation you need for a church credit card. By the way, I did do a video some time ago, and I'll link to that on why churches shouldn't provide credit cards to their employees. That's worth listening to, especially if you're trying to decide whether or not your church should have them. For credit card transactions, what I want my card holders to do is to perform some kind of a statement reconciliation. So I want them to look through their statement line by line and match up all the receipts and be able to identify the business purpose, so what they purchased, and then also be able to provide some direction on how I should code it. So what budget should it hit? What fund should it hit? A lot of times they'll know the specific line item in the budget that they should be hitting. That's all good. So one of the tools that I found helpful for this is my credit card log. This is just an Excel template, and I'll make that available in the description. There will be a link to that. And what they would do is fill in their name, the statement date, and then list out all their transactions. And the include some kind of a description of that expense. And then over here, they should be able to identify usually the account or even the budget that it's going to go towards. Um, so I found that kind of helpful. Then also, I like to have them sign it just because it feels more official. So if you're working in a paper world, that's what I like. For some of my people that I work with, they do a credit card log. For other ones, they'll write on the statement directly, but they'll always have a receipt. So even if you have a credit card log, you still need receipts. And so the people that just write on their statement, a lot of times what I'll do is I'll just write on my own receipt. So here's an actual receipt that I had for when I went to Wagner Tyndall. And I wrote on it, and that would match up with what I turned in for expenses. Now let's go ahead and look at mileage. And again, a lot of this is going to sound similar. You're still going to want to know what the business purpose was. You're going to still want to know when, and you're going to want to know how much. While the main person that's going to be reimbursed for mileage is going to be the pastor, you're always going to have those people that um, drive once in a blue moon. So maybe they're driving for a mission trip, or they're driving for annual conference if you're United Methodist. And so how do we reimburse them? And I would just have them fill out an expense voucher. I did include some language here at the bottom that says how it's reimbursed is really up to the finance committee. So let's just say your practice is to reimburse them for their fuel costs. I think that's fine, especially if they're only driving once in a blue moon. Some churches might say, let's reimburse the IRS rate, which happens to be 56 cents per mile. Good for you. You could also do, like the conference says, we do 60% of the IRS mileage rate for volunteers. And I think that's fine as well. So just pick a system and try to be consistent with that. And I would use an expense voucher for this. For pastors and anybody else that gets reimbursed regularly for mileage, what I encourage is some kind of a mileage log. So I have an example here, and this is an Excel template, and the link is in the description, but there's really two sheets to this Excel. So the one sheet is if you want to print it out and fill it in by hand, and the other sheet is if you want to fill it out on your computer. Either way is fine. The other thing is I know pastors that'll use an app to track their mileage, and that's a cool deal. And I've had pastors too that'll just keep track of in their planner. They'll have a paper planner and they'll keep track of their mileage, and then they'll just make a photocopy of that when it's time to get reimbursed for mileage. Normally, pastors should be reimbursed monthly, or staff should be reimbursed monthly for their mileage. They should still be tracking the date and the reason. The reason, they don't have to go into detail. They don't have to say I met with Mrs. Smith about her alcohol issues or something like that. They could say I met with a member about a concern, something like that, or a member visit. And then they want to track their odometer readings so they get an accurate count of their miles. And that's what you really want. Hopefully this has been a help to you, and hopefully the templates are useful as well. They're linked in the description. And really this is about trust. Really this is about can the people trust the church to handle the money well? And this documentation will help you do that. And then when you have your annual audit, and every church needs an annual audit, by the way, either by volunteers or by a CPA, it'll help you get through that audit easier, and they'll be impressed by how you are caring for the finances. All right. God bless you. Until next time.